Thank you so much for joining us for day 2 of the Sustainability Conference 2021. We had a fantastic day of programming yesterday, and thank you to anyone out there who was able to join us. It was a lot of fun. And we have a brand new day of fantastic speakers. And right now it is my pleasure to introduce Kristen Mitchell, Donnie Clemens, and Isa Gonzalez. These 3 women are graduate fellows in the DU Center for Sustainability, all in different graduate programs, which is really exciting. And so they have come together to give us some insights on how we're going to have to change our thinking now that we are almost a year into a pandemic. And with that, I will hand it off to you all.
Thank you, Emily. We're going to get our presentation up here. All right, we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. We are presenting on a post-COVID mind shift. Today, we're going to go into some elements of systems of the US and how they affected us. But I think Donnie has the intro. Right, so she can take it away.
Okay, so hello everyone. Like Kirsten said, we're going to talk to you guys about some of the problems that our systems are facing and how these problems have been exacerbated with the pandemic. The CDC has reported over 25 million cases and over 427,000 deaths in the United States since the pandemic began. So as you all know, we've all been impacted by this pandemic because we're all trying to adjust to our new routines by implementing changes that we didn't really think would be a part of our daily lives over a year ago. But unfortunately, the negative effects of the pandemic have been disproportionately affecting minorities, people of color, and those in lower socioeconomic status. So why is this the case? So in order to understand this, we are gonna look at the larger picture. We believe that it's important to look at how the current system we live in works and how it is broken and has been broken for a long time since before the pandemic began. So we're gonna do this through the eyes of a young girl named Nora and give you guys some insightful comparisons of her world with ours. And the pie that Nora is baking represents the crucial systems in the United States. Yeah, and so as Nora is gonna try to bake a pie, we're gonna see what happens to her pie.
Yeah, we see that we're gonna have a pie, and now just like when a pie is made with too many substitutions and ingredients that aren't quality, things start to fall apart. So just like the systems of the US, raging inequality, food insecurity, housing shortages, rampant healthcare costs and access, and quality issues in education have gotten exponentially worse during this pandemic and display issues with how we've built our society as a whole. So COVID showed us a lot of holes in our system and how we were not set up to withstand basically any kind of stress like a pandemic. So we're gonna look at some of these systems in a little bit more depth in this presentation and see how the pie of the US is not how it's cracked up to be. So the 5 slices of the US pie we're going to talk about today signify a few areas affected the most by COVID and systems that, when disrupted by something like this, affect American life the most. So we identified development, food, education, healthcare, and housing as areas that are all connected and affect human and societal development the most, especially when disrupted. So Isa is going to go through development as a whole, and then Donnie and I are going to follow Nora through food, education, healthcare, and housing to see how disruptions in these systems affect her directly.
All right, so the development part of the pie. So the definition of development has been changing throughout time. Scholars have always argued on what it is that develops, how things should develop, and how to measure progress. And so around the mid 20th century, the idea that development was measured through the growth of a country's GDP, and then their modernization was really popular among Western nations with influence, particularly the United States. But with time, a lot of scholars and thinkers began to challenge this notion that development had to be a linear, one-size-fits-all trajectory that would be only measured through economic growth and modernization, because it was more of a Westernization thing at this point. So economic growth is obviously still a really important factor in development, but around the 1990s, the United Nations and other development institutions began adopting agendas that favored human development a little more. So the way that development was perceived shifted towards focus on human development that was measured through population's capabilities. So this is anything from like the capability of a population to lead a long and healthy life, having secure employment, access to education, being able to participate in society, and self-expression, among other things. So yeah, and so how does this relate to sustainability? Well, development is actually really closely linked to sustainability in several ways. As I previously mentioned, it used to be thought as a linear process that needed to happen with the goal to acquire wealth and modernizing. And this, frankly, on a global scale would be impossible because the processes that wealthy nations have taken to industrialize are not good for the environment. So having each nation around the world follow this trajectory would be extremely harmful to the planet. I mean, China and the United States alone are responsible for roughly 45% of the world's CO2 emissions, while only accounting for about 22% of the population. So as more attention was being brought to the negative impacts that rapid economic growth and industrialization have had on the environment, development initiatives began shifting to some that were more environmentally friendly. So one of those examples is the development of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015 by the United Nations, and adopted by all the member states. And the goal is to achieve these by 2030. And they're just a set of goals that are focused on human development to creating like a more just and equitable world. So I mean, obviously sustainable development agendas are very ambitious, especially on a global scale. In the United States, we have yet to achieve many of these goals. And many of these are difficult to accomplish because of the existing systems that we have and how they continue to fail and disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, mainly Black Americans, minorities, and immigrant communities. Yes, so as you guys will see throughout this presentation, the systems need to change in order to create a more inclusive and prosperous society. There is an English economist named Kate Raworth who proposes that economies need to be restructured and designed to thrive and not grow in order to be effectively sustainable. So basically her model is described as a donut, the one on the left side, where the social foundation, which are our systems, are balanced to support everyone in our society, while also taking into consideration the limits that we have to harm the environment with our activities. So humanity should exist in that little ring that is between the ecological system and the social foundation. But unfortunately, she describes the current system being more like the donut on the right side, where our systems are not balanced and we are overshooting our limits beyond the ecological system. So as you guys can see, like Nora's pie, this donut needs to have the correct balance of ingredients to function properly, and I guess in this case, to taste well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Isa. Okay. COVID is going to have lasting effects on girls like Nora because of how it's disrupted our food distribution system. Nora lives in a food desert. The local corner store that her oh my goodness, these notes. All right, it's all messed up. Okay, so because her school has gone remote, she no longer has the option to eat lunch at school, which was one of her main meals for the day. Her local corner store has had to close down, and they use that in between big grocery store trips, so they don't have that option anymore. Because of transportation disruptions and decrease in service, it's really hard for Nora's mom to get to the grocery store. So that makes it an even more difficult option to pursue. And then after getting by on the local McDonald's to supplement meals they had trouble obtaining from other places, even that option is no longer because a COVID outbreak shuttered it for the near future. And because Nora's family does not have a car, it makes going to food banks pretty impossible because they have no way to transport heavy goods. So, yeah, basically, this is an issue. So in 2019, the US saw about 37 million people impacted by food insecurity. This pandemic obviously causes this number to rise. And then in 2020, we saw over 54 million people report that they did not have access to enough fresh, healthy food to feed their families. This is a 32% increase in people who cannot access what they need to sustain a productive life in just 1 year. We'd previously seen these numbers steadily decreasing in the decades since the Great Recession. All of that improvement has been completely lost at this point. So it is pretty a dire situation. Food insecurity can lead to mental and physical health problems, and healthy, fresh, consistent meals are key to the development of children under 5. When people have access to fresh and healthy food, it keeps their bodies healthy and out of the hospital. A consistently food insecure person will spend up to 45% more than the average person on medical care costs. We saw this in real time with the COVID-19 crisis. People of color, specifically Black and Latino Americans, who are more likely to be low income and food insecure, were seen to be hospitalized with coronavirus at a rate of approximately 4.7 times the rate of their white counterparts. This is not an accident, and this is not a coincidence. This is how our systems have been built. Bodies that live in food deserts and experience consistent food insecurity are normally at risk for a variety of health problems. And right now, they're at a higher risk of COVID-19. So basically, food insecurity normally kills. It normally causes diseases, but right now, it's far worse.
And Nora's education isn't simply about her just going to school. It's interwoven in all of our social structures and has direct impacts on her health and quality of life. Its fragility has been tested by COVID in many ways. Unemployment and income losses incurred by Nora's parents can reduce her educational achievement by threatening her early childhood nutrition, as Kristen mentioned, reducing her family's ability to provide supportive learning environment, and by forcing a delay or abandonment of her siblings' college plans. Lack of access to education harms communities also by robbing students of the opportunity to help create solutions to challenges within their own communities and to be proactive in constructing sustainable solutions. In addition to learning subjects like math and English, at school, students learn foundational skills, develop skills like cooperating, taking responsibility for their actions, and values that honor their social contract within society. At its best, Nora's schools offer her fellow students and educators space for purposeful activities, social membership, and opportunities to develop competence. With school closures in over 190 countries to date, Nora's education is at risk, with existing differences being aggravated by inequalities and access to remote learning options. Staying at home can also be a risk for Nora. School closures have been associated with spikes in labor, neglect, sexual abuse, and teenage pregnancies. Our education system is directly impacted by the other structures in our country. And these have been exacerbated by COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic has also revealed starkly and publicly the interconnections between social and economic equality, health equity, and population health. Our health is inextricably linked to that of our neighbors, family members, the first responders, teachers. We're all connected. People of color experience disproportionate pre-existing conditions, unequal access to healthcare, and lack of access to supplies and spaces. As Isabel and Kristen have mentioned earlier, Latino and African American residents of the US have been 3 times as likely to become infected as their white neighbors. This is just despite both groups comprising only 13% of the population. Also, American Indian and Alaska Native people have died in connection with COVID at nearly twice the rate of white people in a sample of 14 states, according to the CDC. Next slide, please.
Okay, and then the next system that COVID affects a lot is housing, which is obviously important to everyday life. So we're going to take a look at Nora again. Nora's family lives paycheck to paycheck. When Nora's mother loses her part-time job, Nora's father's income is not enough to cover rent and bills and food for the family. They try to go without as much as they can, but after a couple of months, they are no longer able to make full payments. They try to go speak with their management company, but they won't accept partial payments, and they assess a late fee for every week the rent is late. They find a rental assistance program that will cover most of their past balance. But the management company won't fill out the application or accept any federal aid, so they are back to square one. The balance they have to pay becomes insurmountable every week. Nora worries that they will be homeless when the eviction moratorium ends. So, people living paycheck to paycheck, which is predominantly low-wage workers, were hardest hit by the pandemic. One missed paycheck can result in a missed rent payment, which can quickly end up in an eviction. And eviction moratoriums have been helpful at keeping millions of people in their homes, but they're not federal and overarching, and moratoriums vary widely by state, county, and even city. So you might be safe in one part of the nation, but you're going to experience a swift eviction in another part of the country. Evicted families either end up living on the streets or they move in with other family members or friends. Both of those instances put them at higher risk of COVID because of overcrowding and being in and out of space constantly, not quarantine. So we're basically putting people who live paycheck to paycheck in an impossible situation. One missed rent payment, one bad day, one bad week can start this cycle, and then just all of a sudden you're homeless and you're food insecure. It's just been, the system is not catching anyone. It's made it just very worrisome to live. So I'd say COVID has truly created a perfect storm for those at the poverty level, and the US is not weathering it well at all.
So where do we go next, and how do we get there? Nora's family experienced these things directly, but they affect us all as a whole. Addressing inequity helps all of us by preventing the severity of the effects of the weaknesses in our systems on our entire population. As far as education is concerned, we can seek to bridge the digital divide and ensure all kids have universal access to internet connectivity, digital tools in the digital world. Educational equity increases the safety and security of children, as we mentioned earlier. Some brief notes about healthcare are that we can invest in the social infrastructures that strengthen public health and medical care. We can include in the decision-making the people most affected by health and economic challenges, and benchmark progress based on their outcomes. We can engage a variety of ages, races, ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation, and other social demographic characteristics when conducting medical research and testing. Establish equal access to healthcare nationwide. And for as far as housing is concerned, we can think about city planning and assistance in considering everyone when mapping out our cities.
Oh. So we've seen a pie that didn't turn out so well, but what we're trying to go for is a pie that's delicious and that everyone can eat it, and that's nutritious for everyone. That doesn't let people slip through the cracks, because like I said before, right now it's a very precarious situation. These systems are built very delicately. So you have one bad day, one bad week, one bad month, you're all of a sudden at the risk of being hungry, homeless, sick, your children not being educated. Like, it's just a very fine line between being okay and not being okay. And this is not how these systems are supposed to function. They're supposed to work for all citizens, not just the people at the top. So taking into account what Donnie just mentioned, things that we can do to move forward, thinking about it more holistically in a city forward way will help us create a world and a society that can handle disasters like this without completely falling apart. And that's all we want. So thanks for listening to us. I hope you learned some things, and we've got lots of time for questions if anyone has any questions. Oh, yeah, we can talk about ourselves. I am Kristen. I am a Master's of Public Policy student. I'm getting the GECA certificate, so Global Environmental Change and Adaptation. That's a certificate that you can get in the Corbell School. I am the food team lead, so hence the food insecurity focus. We run the food pantry on campus, so if you did not know that existed, we have a food pantry. It's available to anyone with a DUID number. All you do is go to the Center for Sustainability website, click on the food pantry. There's a form there, you fill it out, and you go and pick up your bag on Tuesday. So that is what my team handles. And yeah, we're just trying to basically bring more awareness of food insecurity, how prevalent it is on campus. There's a lot of food insecurity across universities in the US, and get people to use food pantry when they need it.
I'm Donnie. I'm in Daniels School of Business, pursuing my MBA with a focus on sustainability and supply chain management. At the center, I head up the marketing communications team, which handles all the social media, events, and marketing for our initiatives at the center.
I'm Isa Isabella. I am studying international development, and I'm also getting the GECA certificate like Kristen is. At the center, I am the lead for the energy team. And so we actually do have a pretty exciting event coming up, the Energy Challenge. And yeah, that's me, I guess.
We did have a question come through in the Q&A function from Karen. She asks, what have you learned about some examples of policies or approaches that do work to address some of the issues that you brought up today?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that was on, I don't know if that was a solution. So SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, has been a foods insecurity support program since it was created in 1964 and it was solidified in the 1970s. It's a really old program in the way of government programs, but it does work. It allocates money to food insecure families every month. You just ensure that you're below the federal poverty level at 130%. Anyways, they have expanded this program during the pandemic. They call it pandemic EBT, and it's successful that they expanded it. The rollout has not been as successful. People were confused when they're going to get their benefits and how much and at what point, but it was really important that they expanded SNAP, and they did that, and it's helping a lot of people. So I would say that's definitely one thing that America responded to do.
I think we also in the US tend to do an adequate job when it comes to saving our economic and kind of capitalistic system. So just the added cushion that a lot of people received in the form of kind of supplement checks also helped to kind of keep our, to fill in some gaps for some people and to keep our economic system going. And I don't think that that's something we should take lightly. I think that we're very lucky that we live somewhere that we're able to do that.
I guess in terms of sustainable development, there has been a shift with the new administration towards adopting more or being more environmentally conscious in the policies that are going to be implemented. Obviously, it is kind of early to see like the effects of these, but just definitely having that shift in focus to wanting to address the issues of climate change is huge compared to where we were a couple months ago.
And a lot of those, wouldn't you say, Issa, are some throwbacks to the previous president. So we kind of do know some of the great effects that subsidizing alternative energies can have, for example, which was signed back in as a focus. And I think a lot of the point of our presentation was that even though everything exists in its own sector, everything correlates. So a lot of the things that the new president is trying to bring in just helps to float all the other systems up.
Just like when one of those systems fail, it affects the other system. So when they're built well, they can help support the other systems. I can elaborate a little bit on the rental assistance. There was a really large amount of money, I think, through the CARES Act that was set aside for rental assistance. And it's a really easy website to navigate. You just go and you fill out the form to get more rent. But like I mentioned, in my housing part, there is that element of the landlord being able to reject it, which is very sketchy. If you get this rental assistance and you're really excited and you're ready, I think it's federally, but maybe it's just by state. Your landlord can say they don't want to do that. So that system has been set up fairly well until the point where if someone wants help and isn't able to be helped, they're kind of stuck. But the CARES Act introduced a lot of really good funding. Just like Donnie said, we got the first round of stimulus checks in it. And they set up food insecurity and housing. I don't know if there was education in that one, but they did try and figure out where we were going to need enough money, and they did try and make it available to us. The imposition of these programs weren't as perfect as we thought they were going to be. And education, they did they did that program, I don't know if it's still going on, but they had it where you could pick up your school lunches at like around noon. So they tried to make them available to any student, not just low-income students on free or reduced lunches, which was cool, but you still had to be able to get yourself there. So the transportation element was a little bit still an impediment. Q&A.
So we had another question come through. Have any of you had any new ideas that you think would be beneficial to implement? The things that perhaps the government hasn't yet done, either at the local level or the federal level?
I don't know how, it's not a new idea, but I will bring up something that was on our last slide. Something that's been really cool to watch happening in homelessness in Colorado, especially, that has been really cool for me, but nationwide, has been the concept of what we call, well, what I put on the last slide is Project Roomkey. So that project buys old hotels and large buildings and outfits them to house homeless people. So this isn't a new solution. This has been happening. I know the Colorado Homeless Coalition purchased an old hotel early 2020 to outfit for homeless people. But I think it's a solution that should be implemented a lot more, and it's very cost effective because they're not building new infrastructure, you're just outfitting it, and then it gives these people a individual place, which is found to be much more effective at pulling people out of homelessness than a shelter. When they have their own space and they have their own autonomy, they're able to get out of needing to rely on these systems. So I would say that I think there's probably a lot more innovative ways we could expand on that idea and do that, but that is something that I think definitely could be implemented more.
I feel like we have a list, and every time, you know, Issa, Kristen, and I met maybe about once a week or so to construct this presentation for everyone. But every time we would meet, there would always be something exciting that we were from class, or that we were working on, or just we would always chat about solutions and other ways that the system could work. What has been on my mind lately is not a very like specific direct thing per se, but right now what I'm feeling that we could do as individuals the most is to just change our mindset into thinking more collaboratively, you know, thinking a lot less, you know, red versus blue and clean versus unclean. Like, you know, green against versus anything. I really think that things have to connect more. You know, I think when you look at some sides, we have no problems with saving industry and saving, you know, financial infrastructures and bailing out, you know, huge corporations and things like that. But when it comes to us as people and individuals, sometimes we take issue with that. So I think even just shifting those things to make, again, just our systems work together more, but even the mindset that we have behind the systems, more accommodating of the two sides or multilateral sides, would be a huge push. And I know it's not a specific answer, but I think it's just a huge key.
Thanks. Casey came through with a question for you all. They ask, what do you see as DU's role to integrate learning about such complex interrelated global issues involved in sustainable development?
I guess. So I graduated from undergrad in May and I started grad school right after. And I can tell you that there is already a very big difference between the way that DU professors talk about development versus how my professors in undergrad did. There is, specifically for the pandemic, there has been a very important focus, at least in my international studies courses, about thinking of public health as a security issue, not just as its own category. It's very important that we think of public health as, you know, a threat that could be a threat to our national security, but, you know, our global security. So having that, those conversations and that topic at the center of a lot of these courses that are gonna like help us think about developing new policies or projects is very important, because previously security was more of a topic that you would think of in terms of like military security and stuff like that. But the truth is that we live at a time where issues like viruses can be very threatening to us. So I think that, I mean, there's always definitely room for improvement, but just having that integrated into the courses that we have is very key to the way that professors begin to teach things that have to do with, I guess, threats to our systems and on the global scale to our entire world. So that's like a little broad, and that's not like super specific.
Yeah, I would definitely say DU's already doing it on that sense, like education, having us stand back and look at things holistically. And I mean, we're all DU students, and we had this thought to like kind of analyze this system, and we could all tell, we all had different ideas about how COVID was affecting the world too, which was really cool for us to bring all of our different passions into this. But yeah, and just not letting us settle into this status quo is good mentality is something that DU doesn't let us do, which is really great. And just having the Center for Sustainability here on campus and having funding for it is imperative. That sustainability is central to all of these issues. That's why we're talking about them. But further from that, it's something that we need to think about and that used to address all of these issues and fix these systems. And we can't just think about the right now. We need to think about what's going to happen in 5 years. And I think that's something that we're being prepared to do here, is look at how these issues, how what we're doing now is going to affect things in 5 or 10 years, 20 years, especially in my master's public policy. That's pretty much central. Like, how can we create policies that are going to be effective and will actually address the problem we're looking at? So I've definitely, yeah, I would definitely say us as DU students have a big role, and DU as a university has a big role, but it's supporting it pretty well, just through supporting education and sustainability and all of the things that we do.
I definitely think that the Center for Sustainability is a very important part of what DU is doing. At least, like I said, previous experience, my previous university did not have anything like this at all. And I think it's really important that the center is trying to reach as many students as possible to, you know, spread awareness and engage the community in more sustainable projects and initiatives.
Fantastic. Well, and thanks everyone. Thanks. We like being here on campus. Yeah, if there's no other questions from the audience, we'll go ahead and thank Kristen, Donnie, and Isa for their fantastic presentation and their fantastic insights. And thank you to the audience for your thoughtful questions and for engaging with us this morning. I do hope that you will join us later today for some of the other sessions. We'll be diving into the next one starting right at 10 o'clock, talking about carbon neutrality here at DU. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday, and we'll see you around. Thanks.
Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed and learned a lot. Have a great weekend.